When your inner critic shows up, what do you do in that moment? How do you break the pattern of letting it take over what's going on in your mind? You're listening to Pure Light, where we explore how you can believe in yourself and be happy with who you are. My name is Ailey. I'm a coach, writer, and yoga and meditation teacher. This is episode 129. So in the last episode, I talked about the biggest problem with beating yourself up. And I said I'd talk about how to break that pattern in the next episode. I'm actually going to split that up into a couple of episodes. So this is the first one, and it's about what to do in the moment that happens, in the moment that you start beating yourself up. So if you are somewhere safe, like if you're not driving, take a second to close your eyes and just think about what happens when your inner critic shows up. So where are you? When does it start? Like, what are the things that kind of trigger it? What happens next? How do you react to it? And what is the ultimate result? Like, where do you end up at the end of that experience? Because if you think about it, beating yourself up is just like any other habit. So there's some kind of trigger, which may be a thought. For example, thoughts with the word should, I think, are often triggers. So I should have done that. I should have said this. Emotions can also be triggers. So for example, if you feel shame about something or maybe guilt, and then any circumstances or events that create those kinds of thoughts or emotions. And then once that trigger happens, there's your reaction. So there's kind of what you do in terms of how you deal with that voice, with the inner critic. So do you try to block it out? Do you try to fight it? In my experience, that often ends up in like kind of a mental battle where it's like there's both sides playing out and you get stuck in your head because it's constantly going back and forth. Or do you judge that voice? Like, is there a thought about that voice that's kind of like, that shouldn't be here, I shouldn't be thinking that, which then just kind of compounds what you're thinking. And then there's the outcome. So some of the potential outcomes to beating yourself up might be things like self-destructive behaviors. So things where you're kind of like checking out and doing something that really isn't in the service of you being at your best. So things like overeating or maybe drinking or something like that. And another potential outcome is a negative sense of self. So just like any other habit, there's that trigger, then that reaction, and an outcome. And even if you don't like the outcome that this habit is leading to, it can still be hard to break the pattern because it's something that you're used to doing. So how do you break this pattern? So here's the good news. There's only so much that you can focus on in any given moment. For example, if you walk into a room that has 100 TVs that are all on different channels, there's no way that you would be able to pay attention to all of those things at once. And so in the same way, there's only so much capacity that you have in your awareness to focus on things. So if you think about where your awareness can go, there are different sensory spaces where you can focus your attention. So there's what you can see in the space around you. There's also what you can see in your own mind in terms of any images or visuals or colors that you can see mentally when you close your eyes, for example. There's also what you can hear in your environment, the sounds related to whatever's going on around you. And then there's also the sounds that you hear inside your own head. So the voice inside your head, the voice that is beating you up. There's also what you can feel in terms of contact with the physical world. So if you're standing on the ground, you can feel your feet on the floor. If you're shaking someone's hand pre-COVID, that's something that you could also feel. Or if you're giving someone a hug, or if you're sitting on something, that's also stuff that you can feel. And then there's also what you can feel internally in terms of the feelings or sensations in the body. There's also, what you can smell and what you can taste. But in terms of when you're in the pattern of beating yourself up, those are probably not the dominant spaces. So when you beat yourself up, the voice inside your head tends to take up the most space because it gets louder and louder, and it can be almost like a snowball rolling down a hill, like getting out of control, gaining momentum, and gaining energy, especially if your mind is reacting to each thought. Because then there's the thought that's beating you up, and then there's a thought about the thought, and then there's a thought about the thought about the thought. And at the same time, there's a lot of resistance to what you're experiencing, because what you're experiencing is something that you don't want to be experiencing. So in order to shift this pattern, it needs to come from a place of no negativity. So rather than kind of like trying to force the voice to go away or trying to force it to be quiet, it needs to come from a place of accepting what is happening inside of you. So instead of getting into an internal battle or trying to kind of numb the voice or make it shut up, you can take a different approach and shift your awareness away from the voice inside your head so that it isn't as loud. Because if it's quieter or in the background, it's a lot easier not to get triggered by it. So it's kind of like turning down the volume on those TVs, like on the ones that have that negative voice. And when you do that, you can create space for more kindness and compassion and love within you. The easiest way to put that voice into the background is to focus on the body. And the easiest way to do that is by focusing on the breath. Because according to yogic philosophy, the breath is the bridge between the mind and the body. So the breath can help you shift your attention from the mind to the body and from thinking to feeling. And the other benefit of doing that is that when you are beating yourself up, it's possible that your body is going into fight or flight mode because it's almost like someone is yelling at you, which is not a pleasant experience. And so if your nervous system is kicking in and kind of like fueling that even further, focusing on the breath will bring you back into a state of balance. It'll also help you get out of your head. When you beat yourself up, it may seem like the problem is you. It may also seem like the problem is your thoughts, and if you could just make the thoughts go away, everything would be fine. But the problem isn't either of those things. It's how you relate to the thoughts. And if you learn to shift your awareness, you can find the space within you to allow those thoughts to be there without getting consumed by them or without letting them define you and without letting them trigger you. Beating yourself up is just a mental habit. It isn't a reflection of your worth. And the best way to strengthen your capacity to make that shift in your awareness from the thoughts to your body is to practice breathing. And it may seem weird to practice breathing because it's something that we do all the time, but that doesn't mean that we do it well. And paying attention to the breath elevates it from something that we do on autopilot to something that we do with conscious intention. And practicing paying attention to the breath on a consistent basis will help you connect to it more in the moments where you need it the most, like when your inner critic shows up. I'll include some links to guided breathing practices in the show notes. Go to purelightpodcast.com and click on the show notes for this episode 129, to get them. And if you want to make sure you get the next part on how to break the pattern of beating yourself up, subscribe to Pure Light wherever you listen to podcasts. Thanks so much for listening. Until next time, may you be guided by your light.